Welcome to Testing in the Pub.
Welcome back to part 2, Testing in the Pub, with Dan Billing, talking about security testing. You've spoke about Stride, which is in great detail about the threats.
Yeah.
But with the, say, OWASP Top 10, where does that fit with Stride, for example? So you're modelling your testing around about Stride. Do you fit those top 10 vulnerabilities?
You can. So the OWASP Top 10 cover a number of different areas, which would then link into the Stride model.
Right.
So you've got injection, which is the biggest one. It's the biggest headache for security specialists out there. And that could be SQL injection, LDAP injection, any other kind of injection. You inject any kind of code into an input or a header or whatever interface. So and that you can use that to do the tampering that we spoke about earlier, or escalation of privilege, or denial of service, or nicking log files out of the system by extracting it by doing a SQL query through the code. So those kinds of things are quite common. And we spoke about escalation of privilege, so that would cover things like broken authentication and session management. So you're stealing user cookies, session cookies rather, and using them to get access to levels of the system that you should have access to. So that's number 2, broken authentication and session management. And the third one, cross-site scripting. That's a really nice one. You can use cross-site script, and it kind of exploits a user's trust in the website that they're using. So essentially what happens here is that the hacker or the malicious user will send a script to the victim via a link in a web page or an email or a text message or an instant message, and they'll click, if they're not aware of what the threat or risks are, they'll click that and they think, okay, I'll trust that because it's coming from
the website,
the website that they go into, their banking website, for example. And then as soon as they do that, they've executed a script which sends the data that they're submitting into a form straight back to the hacker. And then that will allow the hacker to do things like spoofing, for example. Insecure direct object references. That's very much one that you need to work with your developers with as well. So, for example, you're using you've essentially opened up database keys or files or directories to the open world, and you can get access to the data, and that will lead eventually to the threat I spoke to you about, which was information disclosure.
Yep.
So and the next one was security misconfiguration. So the frameworks, web servers that you're using aren't configured correctly, and therefore allowing access into the system through the back door because you haven't got particular hardened system set up, or your queries and your database are dynamic rather than parameterized, for example. So if you can build a query on the fly and inject that in, then that's something you shouldn't be able to do, really. Sensitive data exposure itself, it's both. We mentioned information disclosure, but this one's a specific one on the top 10 as well. So we need to properly protect things like credit card data, social security or national insurance numbers that we have here, those kinds of things. Authentication credentials. So, for example, your banking details, you'd have username. To log into your bank, you'd have account number and sort code. You've probably got some sort of PIN number to allow you access to that. And depending on the bank, you might have a little. I've got one for one of my bank accounts. Little pin slot. The card reader. Apparently, they're not as secure as they make out, but it's better than having a random keyword that's based on your mother's maiden name or whatever.
They're probably a bit of placebo, though, aren't they? Let's be honest. I think a little bit. You feel if you've got a bit of specific hardware that somebody sent you, you inherently feel more secure.
And I have to admit, I did feel that. Well, when I got mine through from my bank, I thought, okay, great, I've got one of these finally, and no one can. And when I look at the numbers of different combinations of numbers that come out of it, it's not all that random.
It's only an 8-digit number.
Yeah.
But I suppose you've got the extra security because it will only let you attempt it a certain amount of times.
Yeah, you do. So that will then therefore help prevent brute forcing.
Yeah.
So cross-site request forgery is another one, and I mentioned that earlier, where I had the tab browsers, and I was using one session from one session from one tab in another, and it was basically the second session was updating this first session. It was all very complicated, and that exploits the victim's trust in their browser rather than the website they're using. So this is where users, real people out there, need to keep up to date their browsers, and not a lot of people do. And what despairs me is there are a lot of organisations out there, particularly in the public sector, for whatever reason, still insist on having old versions of browsers.
There's a lot of companies in government as well still use i6, don't they?
i6, i8. These are full of holes.
Windows XP.
People, listen to me. Upgrade your browsers.
Just use Chrome. It upgrades itself.
Okay, well, yeah, Chrome's great, but it's not great for security testers, and I'll tell you why. If you try and do a SQL injection or a cross-site scripting attack using Chrome, it will stop you from doing it because it's got built-in protection. You can switch it off. It's all in the underlying controls. We'll talk about browser tools later, but you can't do it out of the box in Chrome. So I tend to do my normal browsing in Chrome, and then if I'm doing my hacking, security testing, I'll do it in IE or Firefox. And then
I just use Firefox for everything.
Yeah, well, I'm not a huge fan of the Firefox browser, but it does have a lot of plugins which are useful for security testing. So
lots of plugins for lots of different kinds of testing as well.
We mentioned there components of a system. If you're using an old version of, say, Windows, for example, then you're going to open up yourself to a whole host of particular issues. What scares me the most is that ATMs, bank machines out there.
XP point of sale, isn't it?
Yeah,
as well?
indeed.
Point of sale,
This is where it kind of gets a grey area for me, because we're now talking about the users being affected. The users being
real people
hacked through the browsers. But whereas when you're doing your security testing, you're actually just focusing on protecting the website. Right? Do you look at that aspect as well?
Yes, I do, because we have users which interface with our application, with our service, and they have a login, and they have an experience that goes on within. If a security bug spoils their use of it, they wouldn't necessarily see the effect of it or the impact of it.
But in terms of them getting not necessarily data that your website has, but for example, their session stolen and things like that.
Yeah, you don't want that stuff going awry.
No, of course. But is that something that you would focus on?
Yeah, I would try and
through your website testing.
I would try and do that. Yeah, if I can. Sure. There is another one where you can get redirected from one page to another, which is unvalidated redirects and forwards, and it can be done quite easily. There's a lot of great testing tools out there for budding security testers to learn from, which will allow you to replicate all of the OWASP top 10 and go through everything in the stride model that I talked about. We can talk about some of those later.
What tools are?
Oh, right. Well, so there are several, and this is kind of where I started from in terms of my learning. When I first started getting heavily into the security side, I did a lot of Googling around, okay, how do I learn to do X, Y, and Z? So I went to the OWASP website, and from that I found various things like the Budget Store, which is an older, it sits on an Apache web server on your local machine, and it's essentially a website which is a buggy retail website, not very functional. There's not a lot going on in there. You just update values and you send transactions through, and it gives you the ability to go and then practice things like SQL injection and cross-site scripting and CSRF against this tool. And there are a lot of other tools like that as well. There's Altera Mutual, which is an IBM built one, and they use that as a sales tool for one of their app scan applications. And I also use Gruyere by Google as well, which is a structured.
Seen that one before. I think we used it at the London Test Academy workshop.
We did, with Evil Tester, Alan.
Yeah, Alan did.
And James and Steve and Tony. That was a great session.
Yeah.
In fact, that was practically, that was where kind of my knowledge started to get consolidated. So They don't pretend that they're security testers, and I don't pretend that I'm a security tester either. But some of the skills that they were talking to us about during the Black Ops testing session that we had were the beginnings of what security testing is. So any testers out there that want to learn technical testing and get into security testing, I really recommend the Black Ops testing day if you can get on it with those guys. It's really good, really worthwhile. So I use Gria quite a lot to just keep my hand in as well. But then ultimately I need to test on my systems at my business. So I use VMs with installations of the latest build of the software that I test on it.
So keeps you nice and independent, which means you're not opening yourself up to kind of any accusations of internal hacking. Or
Indeed,
like that.
And this is where, as testers, we have to be careful. We have legal obligations here. So if you access a system illegally, you can get up to 2 years prison under the Computer Misuse Act. If you modify or delete data via a hack, you can get up to 10 years in prison, and that's just in the UK. If you do it to a US system, well, we have extradition treaties with the United States, and they like to punish hackers quite badly.
Yes.
It's something that you have to be careful of when you're doing testing internally in your businesses. Make sure you've got buy-in from your management before you do it. Just don't go start doing it willy-nilly. Think about what you're doing first. So I work with Rob Lambert, and he and I have sort of agreed, decided what level of testing, is appropriate and acceptable. We worked on that together with various other people in our business, but I still have to operate within the law, and as every tester should if you're doing this. Really careful, and I would pay that some attention before you start thinking about it.
Make sure you understand what you're doing, so you can't accidentally stumble into areas of illegality.
Indeed.
Without realising it.
I guess that kind of brings us onto the whole white hat, black hat thing, essentially.
Make sure you got the right hat.
Indeed.
Can you explain that? White hat, black hat, and grey hat as well.
Grey hat. Okay, it reminds me of the whole black box, white box, grey box testing thing.
Oh no, let's not go down.
Let's not go down. No, okay. But essentially, if you want to put it simply, white hat testers, white hat hackers, essentially are on the side of the angels. They're testers working within organisations that, like ourselves, that test within those businesses and report security bugs and get them fixed. Or they're testers that work in the pen testing community, that work for legitimate businesses that supply security testing services and penetration testing services to other businesses.
The certified people, basically.
Certified people. Or they're people at home doing it for themselves, but they're letting people know businesses quietly, that they've got security flaws.
Right.
They're not putting it out there in the wild.
So this is like bug bounties and things like that.
Indeed, bug bounties is a good example of that. Did you guys get a chance to meet Martin Hall at the London Test Gallery?
Yeah, he spoke a lot about that. Bug hunting for fun and profit.
Indeed, yes. And literally, you can make some money, but you have to follow the bounty hunting,
rules,
codes of conduct that they have. At those Google has a good program for it. I think a lot of other businesses do. Yahoo, I think too. Apple,
Facebook.
Do they? I didn't.
Yeah,
I imagine they would do.
Facebook,
yeah.
The big companies, Apple, Microsoft as well.
In the past, I've raised bugs and sent them to the BBC about the iPlayer, not necessarily security ones. It's quite fun to do that kind of thing, and that's how I, in my spare time, I've also, in the past, not now at the moment, because I just simply don't have the time, done testing at home through things like Bug Finders and U-Test, and sometimes that's security testing that you'll do for them. A couple of years ago, I did some work on the River Island site, which an element of that was security, and they were very interested in the bugs that I found. So that was a while ago, but I've done a lot of that kind of testing for a while. But as we move kind of into the grey hat area, they're essentially people that are potentially doing what they perceive to be good things, but potentially using illegal methods.
Right.
So this is where you fall into areas potentially of illegality in grey box testing. And white hat testers have to be careful as well. White hat hackers have to be careful. They've got to make sure they operate within the law. Grey hat testers are operating on the side of the angels, but they may use illegal methods to do it.
Right.
Plus, they would put all that out on the web for everybody to see, rather than let the companies know on the QT.
Right.
Yeah. So this is a slightly greyer area.
Yeah.
And those are the kinds of guys that, okay, you may think they're doing it for the public good, or the business is good, but eventually it actually comes back on those businesses and ultimately makes them look foolish and lose revenue. Are you adding any value there?
Yeah,
I don't think you are, really.
Maybe to yourself, but maybe not to the brand. Yeah.
And there's a certain amount. I mean, I'm not hugely into the hacking community. I do follow it quite closely from a white hat perspective, to find out what hacks are going on out there and know what vulnerabilities to look for. And I follow a blog called hackmageddon.com. And the headline on their blog is basically, and they use WordPress, by the way, which isn't the most secure blogging tool out there. They use their headline is World War III was fought electronically, or something like that. And they're probably quite right, to be honest. I dread to think that we'll ever have a World War III, but if we do, it'll be a heavy electronic element to that particular fight. And I'd like not to be to see that. And some people say it's happening already, and that's a scary prospect. But if you go to that blog, hackmageddon.com, it's got a list of the last month's serious hacks, or the one prolific hacks. And we've had a major vulnerability put out on the web recently, Heartbleed, for example. Now, I don't know, I can't remember who found that, but it was out on the web before, it was on the web before any business, actually started mitigating against it. But it was an SSL encryption problem rather than an individual organisation's issue.
Yeah, so it affected everybody.
It affected everybody who used OpenSSL, So even if you're using purportedly secure systems, does that necessarily mean you're 100% secure? I don't know. And then there's Black Hat as well, which essentially, they're the ones that are doing for criminal gain, monetary gain. So I hate to use an analogy here. White hat testers are Gryffindor. Black hat testers are Slytherin. I hope that's okay.
Absolutely.
So that's kind of defining it for you, very simply.
Just a question on the difference between grey and white. Then, do you think that grey hat security testers have more of an advantage because they're not restricting themselves?
Well, yeah, in a way. A lot of it is the perception of hacking is very much driven by the media. We've spoken about it briefly already. The media in Hollywood kind of put this sort of veneer on hacking for it to be glamorous and exciting. Hugh Jackman does it in a film, and it's cool. Or Johnny Lee Miller did it in a film, and Angelina Jolie did it in a film, and it looks cool.
What they do on the screen is not close to what happens in real life.
Indeed, but it makes it look glamorous, and it makes it look exciting, and it attracts a lot of young people because they get bored and they want something to do on their computer, and they've got access to the web, and they can do anything from there. And it does attract a lot of young people, and the people have been doing it for years and years and years. And I'd say that it's a lot less restrictive, but you're opening yourself up to potential criminal proceedings put against you. And is it really worth it? If you're working at an organisation and you're doing good work there, then why is that not enough? And I'm not going to share my political views on this podcast. I have to say I'm fairly liberal, but I think that their governments are doing a job to protect us, and we shouldn't really try and undermine them, because otherwise, this whole city's up in smoke, isn't it? So, I'd rather not that happen, even though I live down in the southwest. It's a scary prospect.
Don't hack the southwest of England.
No, please don't hack the southwest of England. We had enough problems with flooding in the winter.
So tell us tell us. We've kind of touched on tools a little bit.
Yeah.
Tell us a bit more about tools. If I was a new security tester, I wanted to get interested in security. What tools are open to me?
Well, we've already mentioned going to the OWASP website, and OWASP is a tool in itself. So go there first. Learn about what it means to do security testing safely, what it means to your organisations, and then they've got loads of projects on there. There's a guy called Simon Bennett, who's the project lead for Z-Attack Proxy. Z-Attack Proxy, I haven't mentioned it yet, but it's as the name suggests, it's a proxy tool. It sits between your browser and your web server. You can intercept traffic with it, like you can with all proxy tools. And you can modify requests and do automated security testing with it. It has Python integration and other scripting languages that it can interface with it. It has an API which you can call to start testing automatically. It's a very versatile tool. It's a GUI front end, so it's very simple to get to grips with. And I say that's a good place to start. But, and here's a but here, if you don't use it appropriately, or you don't become familiar with it and use it in a safe environment first, you could cause a lot of damage with it. As I found to my cost a few weeks ago.
Tread carefully.
Well, I accidentally deleted the test accounts from our test environment using the spidering tool. Yeah, so quite happily own up to that, and I got it rebuilt by the DBA from a previous backup the previous night. But it was quite embarrassing. Z-Attack Proxy's got quite a lot of features in it, so you can do passive scanning. So that's scanning of your applications without impacting the systems at all. It finds vulnerabilities by just reflecting back the response and think, okay, there's potentially a vulnerability there, and it will list that in the GUI on the left-hand side. Then there's spidering, and this is where I had that problem. So what spidering will do is it will explore every link and page it can find. And exercise that by in inverted commas, clicking it and taking it to the, executing that bit of code. And then there's an active scan, which will actively attack the site that's under test with whatever test security hacks you can think of. So from SQL injection to cross-site scripting to fuzzing. And fuzzing is a really cool thing. It basically throws random data at a field and submits it. So, it's quite a lot there it can do, but it's very powerful. So use it with caution. But you can also use it with a lot of other tools as well. So it's got a lot of plugins you can get for it. You can download. There's a really funky thing in there called the Diviner, which I'm still getting to grips with. But essentially, it can build you a test strategy from divining what the attack surface of your site is. It's built
I see. Built kind of the analogy being kind of water dividing.
Yeah, indeed. I
get it.
Yeah. And that's built into Z-Attack Proxy as well as a plugin. It's quite useful. I haven't fully explored it yet, but it's one I'm going to be looking at now to help enhance and build better test strategies for the business I work for. And there's other parts to it as well that you can de-scope or keep in scope certain aspects of the site that you're testing, so you can target specific areas and you don't include tests against areas you don't want to touch, which is really important. So targeting your testing. So that's Z-Attack Proxy. But I also use Fiddler, which is a well-known proxy tool. Every tester should have that on their machines. If you don't, then there's a problem. There is a Mac version, but I don't know how well it works.
It's not great. I've got it.
I would use Z-Attack Proxy if you've got a Mac, because it's Java based. It's really easy to run on the Mac. I've got it on my Mac at home, but I've also got a PC for work. So, and you can link Z-Attack Proxy and Fiddler using its up and downstream proxies, which is quite an easy thing to do. And you can see the traffic going through Fiddler up to Z-Attack Proxy. And Fiddler, you can do things like autoresponders and crafting requests and stuff like that, and you can look at the content of a header. And you can do this in Z as well, but if you're using the two together or with other tools as well, then it enhances the scope of your test, and you can see more information, and ultimately it gives you, the tester, more stuff to give back to the developer when they're investigating bugs.
More information essentially.
there's a lot to go on with Fiddler, and I could go on for hours about it, but essentially it's a great debugging tool for the web. If you're testing web applications, use it, please. Browser tools have got built-in stuff like this as well on Chrome, Firefox, Firebug. Tamper data for Firefox. There's a whole bunch of others like switching user sessions and proxies and things like that. There's a load of plugins there. Another proxy tool, which I also link with Zed and with Fiddler, is Burp Suite, which isn't. There's a free version and there's a paid-for version. The paid-for version's got extra functionality, and I link the three together. And Zed Attack Proxy and Burp work in a similar way, but my personal preference is Zed Attack Proxy. That's the one I use the most. So that's my preference.
They're all kind of desktop based. Is there anything mobile? I mean, obviously you can put a proxy between a mobile device
and a machine,
as the client and the servers, and obviously a lot of app architectures are very kind of traditional client server. But is there anything else that you'd recommend that's mobile specific?
I've come across, thanks to Bill, Mobisec, which is a platform and emulator for mobile devices, and you can expose mobile device architecture for security tests and scans using Mobisec.
It's a very good place to practice.
It is,
Mobisec. It's a very good VM to have.
As regards to mobile security testing, I haven't done an awful lot of it, but what I tend to do is proxy my devices, like an iPad or an Android, via the IP address of my laptop. As long as they're on the same network, you can proxy one through the other, and you should get the same traffic going through it. But I have to admit that mobile testing is not my area of expertise. But I would start with emulators like Mobisec.
Cool. Quick fire round.
Yeah, right. Let's try something a bit different. So we've not done this before.
God.
This is the quick fire round. So we have some questions for you. You have 30 seconds to provide each answer.
I'll do my best.
Should we get countdown music on?
We'll be fairly tough. I can't do the countdown music. If you want to do the countdown music, Dan, you're more than welcome.
Okay. We could just use the timer on the phone.
Yeah, I have a timer, and so we will ask you a question. You then have 30 seconds to answer the question, and after 30 seconds, we go to the next question.
Without deviation, repetition, or hesitation?
Absolutely, and all that.
Okay.
So.
Can I say pass?
No. So, let's start with the first one. So, what's the biggest security bug you've ever heard about?
That I found or that I've heard about?
Either.
Okay, so probably that I've heard about is the Heartbleed SSL. That's very big, very popular. A lot of people use the open SSL architecture. I think that's probably the most prolific one that came out recently. Not a vulnerability that is easy to detect unless you know what you're looking for, though, and it's had a lot of publicity. I think that one is probably a good place for me to start, I think.
Right, okay, next one. What's your ultimate favourite tool?
My ultimate favourite tool, apart from my spade, for security testing, is definitely Zed Attack Proxy. I have to say it's the most versatile, easy to use, get to grips with, but you have to use it with caution. Remember to put your white hat on rather than your black hat on when you're using it, and you got to make sure that you only test what you need to test or should be testing with that tool, because it can cause a lot of damage if you're not very careful. And we're done.
You're getting the hang of this. What's your favourite security book?
Well, okay, so my favourite security book is the Web Application Hacker's Handbook by Marcus Pinto, and I think it's David Griffith. There's two editions. There's the green book, which is the first one, and the blue book, which is the second edition. And it's kind of like the Bible. I'm not particularly religious, but if I do read the Bible, I only dip in to bits of it here and there. This is the same. So call it the Web Application Hacker's Bible.
Ooh, on the button now.
Just on the button. Nice.
Okay, next one. Best security testing event?
That I've been to or plan to go to. I plan to go to AppSec EU this year, but I can't make it due to family reasons. but I'm really looking forward to going next year, and it's at Cambridge this year. If you can go, I really recommend it. It's run by OWASP. They're doing a ZAP tutorial there for a couple of days, and it's going to be, rather than having lots of panels and lots of different companies, it's lots of security professionals talking hacking. So I would go to that. AppSec EU. AppSec EU.
Right, okay. Who's the best person on security testing to follow on Twitter, not including yourself?
Well, I'm not a person you should be following about security testing. I'm just a guy who does it. I'd say Troy Hunt. He's an Australian. He works for Microsoft. He's always blogging about security as a whole, and he's a really great guy to follow. He'll respond to questions if you've got them as well. He raised one about iCloud, people using iCloud to hack people's accounts and hold their iPhones to ransom recently, which is great. And also Bill Matthews.
Squeeze that one in there. Okay, one thing that organisations can do to improve security.
Okay, enable their testers. Empower your testers to do security testing. Give them environments to do the testing in, whether it's a VM, which they can do themselves if they've got, the understanding and know-how, or virtual machines like on Amazon Web Services or whatever. Give them the tools that they need to do it, either paid for or free. OWASP's got a great tool, so there should be no excuse for not doing it. All right?
Nice one.
He's getting good at these within 30 seconds, isn't he? That was the quickfire round.
Fantastic.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, guys.
First time we've done that. That was good.
And no Carol Waterman on
that was good fun. Yeah. Maybe the countdown music next time. just add a bit of suspense.
Yeah. Well, I like suspense, and this is kind of an adventure. And I called my talk "New Adventures in Software Testing" because I love adventures, either fictional or non-fictional. Through learning, which is an adventure in itself. Yeah. And I'll talk a bit about this later when we sit down and talk, but it's why I called it New Adventures in Software Testing, because I love the thrill of doing something new. Yeah. Maybe in a year or two I want to do some other kind of testing. I don't know.
Yes, it's variety is the spice of life.
It is, and the spice of testing as well.
Absolutely.
Indeed.
Absolutely.
Awesome. It's been emotional. Thanks for coming in, Dan.
No worries, guys.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. That's
really enjoyed it.
Really, really good fun.
Thank you very much, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon.
Excellent.